Now, with the greatest respect to our president, and I mean that, it's not personal, I don't understand what he's saying. He has his facts wrong, and his policies are dead wrong. And by the way, I didn't understand the last 15 years reference. I mean, 8 of those years was Obama-Biden. Now, of course, as a Democrat, he tries to discredit supply-side tax cuts. Now, look, let me go through some history. LBJ was John F. Kennedy's vice president. JFK launched the first post-war supply-side across-the-board tax cuts for individuals, businesses, capital gains, everything. Now, LBJ worked hard to get that tax cut passed in the Senate after JFK's tragic assassination. So Johnson was pushing this thing. Now, I wrote a book on this subject, not only praising Democrat JFK's tax cuts that lowered marginal tax rates from 91% to 70%, but I also praised Republican Ronald Reagan, who over 20 years later repeated the supply-side tax cuts and dropped them from 70% to 28%. JFK's tax cuts engendered a huge boom in the 1960s. It was fabulous. And Reagan also had a huge boom in the 1980s. Both of them over 4% economic growth per year without inflation. And they both lasted 7 or 8 years. Now, really, it wasn't until Richard Nixon, unfortunately, destroyed the value of the dollar that the great inflation of the 1970s was launched. That was a different issue. By the way, as a footnote, John F. Kennedy was for a strong dollar backed by gold. Now, I don't want to obsess about this, but, I believe in economic history. And, folks, my book is called JFK and the Reagan Revolution. And you can get that book with one click on Amazon. Just saying. But I don't understand President Biden's reference. And incidentally, more. Under both JFK and Reagan tax cuts, not only did the economy prosper mightily without inflation, but the rich paid vastly more taxes than ever before. That is a point nobody seems to get. Not only because of booming investments and employment, but successful earners didn't need tax avoidance at the lower marginal tax rates. The top 1% share of tax revenues moved from less than 20% to over 40% during this period. Again, at the lower tax rates. The rich paid much more, and the revenues came in, and they didn't have to avoid taxes. It was the Laffer curve at work. Lower tax rates generated economic boom and paid for themselves. More people entered the economy, fewer people avoided tax payments. It's very simple. Now, one thing that troubles me about what President Biden said today in the Rose Garden, and again, Lord knows, this is just policy. This has nothing to do personally. But his reference to LBJ, now, that reminds me, I've been making this point last several shows. This $1.9 trillion so-called COVID relief bill is the largest expansion of the U.S. welfare state, going all the way back 55 years to LBJ's Great Society. Many people believe that Great Society did a lot of harm to the economy and to the very people that were targeted. They came out worse and more dependent. What I want to get to today, though, the leadership of President Biden, all right, that's an issue more to last night. Again, this afternoon in the Rose Garden, he's leading from behind, all right? Now, leading from behind. Now, last night's primetime address, President Biden seemed desperately to try to get in front of things that already happened. You know what I mean? It's not really the best way to do it. The COVID bill itself breaks the bipartisan legacy of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, again, who reformed welfare with work requirements, thereby lowering poverty and increasing jobs. Not the LBJ model, but the Clinton-Gingrich model. Now, President Biden made this point last evening. He said, we can have unity. Unity doesn't just mean about politicians and votes in Washington. That's a very odd point because, yes, unity does. President Biden's calling for unity to wear masks and to distance, okay? I don't necessarily object to that point. But he promised unity and bipartisanship, and in his first big major piece of legislation, gigantic piece, $2 trillion plus this expansion of the welfare state, He did it in a very partisan way, using reconciliation. Republican leaders were not engaged or involved at all. This was a Democratic sweep. So I don't give him much points on the unity argument. Now, finally, I want to make just a quick point on the business about President Trump's 2017 tax cuts, which did the same thing as Kennedy and the same thing as Ronald Reagan. Okay? Right. So Trump's tax cuts were, again, lower tax rates across the board. Let me make that point. Number two, his tax cuts, particularly for large and small businesses, the biggest beneficiaries were not the rich. They were blue collar, middle class, and lower middle class. Whether you're talking about rising family incomes or rising real wages, the lower middle class and the middle class had much, much bigger gains than the top 1%. Commonly, people don't seem to get this or look at the data. Poverty fell, inequality fell, and unemployment hit rock bottom. 50-year lows for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women, and blue collars. 50-year lows. The biggest gains in wages and income and family wealth came to those who needed it the most, the middle and the lower. They outstripped by far the gains for the top 1% or 5%. Those are facts. Those are facts. Those facts come from the Census Bureau, and they come from the Federal Reserve's Consumer Finance Survey. I'm not making this stuff up. And I'm happy to share these facts with anybody. I laid it out at my CPAC speech a few weeks ago. I have the stats. I'm happy to share it with anybody. Just give me a yell. But those are the facts. They were not tax cuts for the rich. They were tax cuts for the middle, and they were tax cuts for the lower middle, which is, by the way, exactly what happened under JFK and under Ronald Reagan. The moral of the story is you want the wealthy to pay more, lower tax rates. But when you lower tax rates across the board and you include business tax rates in there, those who need it the most got the most. It was not the rich. It was the middle income folks. So I'm sorry to take a bit, but I just wanted to square that. It's not personal. It's not personal. But I think Mr. Biden misspoke.